Courage is misinformed to be a skill that is only used when a person is speaking out in front of a large audience, but that is not all of what courage really is. Many people today are struggling with internal thoughts of doubt and are constantly unkind to themselves, which lowers the self-confidence needed to have courage. As I myself struggle to find exactly what I need to make my everyday life easier and have self-confidence, I found that courage is a simple word that has a variety of different ways of expression. Courage is used in everyday life not by just speaking to an audience, but by being vulnerable, by challenging your inner thoughts, and by feeling fear. These practices can help with being able to show more of your true self on a day-to-day basis. First, we will start with vulnerability. When a person hears vulnerability, they believe that it is the exact opposite of courage, but in reality, they are one and the same. Brené Brown's TED Talk on vulnerability informs us of how this is true. First, she states how believing in an individual's worthiness affects courage. If you yourself believe you're worthy, that you deserve to be where you are at a certain point in time, and you deserve to feel the emotions that you are feeling, then it will be easier to speak your vulnerabilities. For example, say that you have an insecurity that everyone at your college is smarter than you. If you believe that you deserve to be in that college with everyone else, it will be easier to be vulnerable and to share what you think, which leads to greater self-confidence, and is practicing courage. Brown goes on to explain the power of telling your story with your whole heart. This in itself is pure courage. She states that if you go on to think that you need to reject what you think you should be in order to be who you are, what is more courageous than rejecting the majority when they're different than you? Another thing about telling your story with your whole heart is that it is impossible to numb emotions. I know everyone wants to seem all happy and grand all the time, but that is not what vulnerability is. We can't numb the bad experiences because then we also numb the happy experiences. We can't have good days without bad days. And you must be vulnerable enough to tell all sides of your story. That is true courage. Another practice that shows courage is being able to challenge those non-encouraging thoughts in your head. Glenn Calvert, a licensed social worker who practices as a therapist, gives techniques on how to challenge thought and what the outcome of challenging those thoughts could be. Challenging your thoughts means that every negative thought is confronted with another more reasonable and more positive thought. One way to challenge your thoughts is to simply think of a better explanation for what is happening. For example, a person who has anxiety would assume that the fact that their actions are being questioned is because they're doing something wrong. But in contrast, it could just mean that it came from pure curiosity. The outcome of this first method could help, over time, help more positive thoughts become the automatic response. This is where being courageous comes in. Not everyone can challenge a negative thought with a positive one. It takes courage to do so, especially when that challenge is happening every day. Another technique of challenging thought, giving 5 minutes. This technique is exactly how it sounds like. As an example, say a young adult has a fear of the rain. It's pouring outside with thunder and lightning coming through the windows. Now, this technique would give them only 5 minutes underneath the covers that they hid under before they get up and face their anxiety. After 5 minutes, they must do something other than what they were doing before. If they get too anxious and have to go back under the covers, that's okay, because in 5 minutes, they will try again. That is courage. The outcome of this technique adds a self-discipline mindset that only people with courage could pursue. It takes so much courage to get yourself out of what you want to do. No one wants to pull themselves out of under the sheets when their fear is right outside the door. The self-discipline leads to self-confidence, because self-discipline is self-caring, and it can be used in any scenario. Now that we have been informed of Brené Brown's talk about vulnerability and its comparison to courage, and we have heard about Glenn Calvert's techniques of challenging thought, let's move into the importance of feeling fear. One of the 6 attributes of courage, according to psychologist Dr. Melanie Greenberg, is the act of feeling fear. Feeling fear means that when fear erupts in a situation, it is not ignored, but it is acknowledged and felt. Some people think that courage is ignoring fear or not having any fear. That is simply not true. Courage comes from looking fear straight in the face and deciding that it is not going to stop you. For example, who is more courageous? The one that jumps off the rope swing without thinking twice, or the one that hesitates and decides to do it anyway? It's the latter, for they had to step through fear, as the first didn't. It is more courageous to face fears rather than not having fears at all. Feeling fear leads to emotions and challenging thoughts that this ties into. A person can't have courage until they know and accept what they fear. Vulnerability also ties into this, because courage is overcoming the fears that you know that you have. A person overcomes fears by challenging themselves and using that self-discipline to feel their fear but continue moving forward. Now that we have been through a lot of new information about courage, let's summarize. Overall, there are many different ways that people are courageous every day. First, there is, as we learned, the power of vulnerability and how being vulnerable and having courage are the same thing. Next, we learned a couple of different courageous techniques that can be practiced on a daily basis in order to fight through anxieties. Lastly, we learned that one of the 6 attributes of courage is feeling fear, and what that means, and how it corresponds to the previous points. If you believe that you don't have any courage, I guarantee that you do, and I bet you use it every single day.